One. Hi, everybody, and welcome to this latest in the ValuesJam guest session series. Wendy, fantastic to have you here today. And to start with, please introduce yourself, tell everybody about the great work you do, and I think you might be going to mention those things in the background.
Yes, well spotted, Alan. Yeah, I'm Wendy White, founder of Wendy Woo Limited. I'm a retired registered childminder who was childminding just when the early years framework came into play. So we had a framework that we had to follow and we had to implement different areas of learning. So basically us childminders became teachers, if you like. We were all under the same umbrella as preschools and nurseries, and we had work to do. So one of the areas of learning was personal, social, and emotional development, which was a little bit of a grey area for us. So I looked online for some resources that we could use to implement and evidence personal, social, emotional development. There really wasn't anything. So I thought, right, well, I'll make something. So I got the old sewing box out and I started to sew. Oh, I've got some here. I started to sew some little stars depicting different expressions, tiny little felt stars that I stuffed. I think that's a little bit unhappy and shocked, and we got silly, which is one of my favorites, and so on. And where's happy? Happy. But so I sent those off to childminders who use them in story sacks and free play for children to start developing socially and emotionally and personally. And that's what PSED is all about. And the childminders loved them and they wanted more and more. So I was sewing and sewing and sewing until suddenly I just got this trigger thumb and I just couldn't sew anymore. But my Ofsted inspector was due to come and see me, and he asked me what the children were playing with. And I told him what I've just told you guys. And he said, you know, there's a big market for something like that. You know, you should really consider producing them, marketing them. So when I retired, I took him up on it, sourced some factories in China because I couldn't sew anymore. Found a factory that really followed my ethos, was sustainable, was green, didn't have children working for them. And so then in 2018, my moon stars were developed. So same sort of idea, bigger stars, happy, sad, silly, shocked, shy, angry, sleepy. And there's probably another one that I've forgotten to mention, but they're all there. And well, to cut a long story short, they are now in over 2,000 earlier settings. They're in homes, of course. They're in family homes. They're in children's homes. They're in Great Ormond Street Hospital. They're in Guy's and St Thomas's Hospital, and thousands of autism organisations all across, all nationwide. But I didn't realise, I didn't really know a lot about autism, but it was my Ofsted inspector who said that children with autism really need help identifying emotions,
Yeah.
and recognizing emotions and showing emotions. And so that, and at that time, autism just suddenly became a very huge thing.
Yeah.
So I was able to help so many children, not just with PSED, but with children with special educational needs as well. So yeah, so that's the story behind them.
Wow, what a brilliant story. And where do you go from here? What does the future hold?
Well, it's very exciting actually, because being on platforms like LinkedIn and Facebook and X, and I get a lot of people inquiring about the resources and how they can get hold of them. So I'm busy. So, and I like just, I mean, I'm a one-man band, so I don't want to get huge. I'm happy just pootling along. But as you can see in the background, I've got my cushions. So they were the follow-up to the Mood Stars. They're happy on one side and sad on the other. They're like 51 centimeters of that squidgy material.
Yeah.
And of course I've got the Mood Star book as well. So I keep evolving, but it's when I have an idea, I think, oh, I might try that. So there's the book. There's a workbook. So you've got a little spot here where you can mark make or make notes. And there's a little question to answer up at the top there. So yeah, so there's the book. And so, you know, I just keep thinking of stuff and carrying on. And I love it. I enjoy every moment of it.
That's fantastic. So let's play Values Jam. So here is the Values Jam card deck, and in here, and it's funny actually because this was created because there didn't seem to be anything similar out there to stimulate values-led conversations, and so I just thought need a card game. And then with Lisa Birtles, the co-founder, we kind of used the principle of a music jam. You know, so with a music jam, you just turn up with what you've got. Nobody tells you where you're going to go. You just start to see where it goes. If anybody stumbles, you don't kind of call a halt to proceedings and have an inquisition. You just embrace it and go with the flow. And we thought, wouldn't it be brilliant to have a game that did the same for conversations? So that's where Values Jam came from. So how many piles shall I make in front of me then, Wendy?
Well, I've got 8 mood stars, so can you do 8?
Yes, I can do 8. Squeeze them in. They're going to be different sizes. So that's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All right, so now on my left is pile 1, and on my right is pile 8. So which pile shall I choose?
Have I got a choice just between 1 and 8?
Yes.
8.
Right, okay, that's easy then. So I'll put these away. And the final pile has 3, 6, 9, 12, 15 cards. So a number between 1 and 15. 6. Well, goodness me. So you've chosen generosity. And yes, and the first question is, what does generosity mean to you? And what does it look, feel, and sound like?
What does generosity mean to me? I see generosity as something that you give, but you don't necessarily want anything back in return. So, yes, a gift or a gesture or an act of kindness without any rewards. My husband is very generous. And so I'm very lucky because I have a lot of generosity here at home, and I think that my family are pretty generous as well. So only one of them that has an ulterior motive most of the time, but I'm not mentioning any names. Because she'll say,
so the core principles then that you're talking about are, on the one hand, it's about giving, but it's without any expectation of something back in return. And the only thing that I would add to that is that for me, generosity implies giving more than you needed to. So, you know, it's not about giving something that was fit for purpose. It's actually when you do a bit more than that, you go extra.
yeah.
either for good reason or for not, and I'm intrigued because
Yes.
you mentioned the ulterior motive there. You've reminded me of some work by a guy called David Maister, I think, who invented the kindness equation. And what he talks about there is these characteristics that that help people to understand that you are to be trusted. But actually, if there is a perceived degree of self-interest, then anything that you do is kind of undermined because people don't trust you because they
Right.
see that you're doing it for an ulterior motive. So in generosity, let's think of either it can be an example from the person that you were referring to, or you might like to make up a hypothetical example of generosity where perhaps there is an ulterior motive. Can you think of one?
Yes, I can think of that particular person who said that she would like, she would love me to come over to her house, and she's going to cook a dinner for me and get in my favorite meal, my favorite wine, and we can chill and we can just hang together. And I said, oh, that's fine. And she said, I'll tell you what as well, I'll come and pick you up and I'll take you home again. So I thought, oh, wow, that's absolutely amazing. Thank you.
Yeah.
Now, there was an ulterior motive that in the morning after I stayed over, she wanted me to look after her dog for the day. So, and she wasn't quite brave enough to say it until that morning. And I said, well, I've had a lovely night. Thank you so much. I'll probably leave round about 12. Shall we go for a walk? Oh, it's just that we're going out in about half an hour, and I wondered if you might look after the dog till about 6 o'clock this evening. And I thought, oh, yes, of course I can. Of course I can. So that was me being generous in return because I am. But that's just a little bit of a I'll do this, but there is a clause.
Yeah. And so if you apply the same thinking to the model that I described, imagine if she had not requested that in the morning, you would have thought she's, that's really generous, isn't it? To entertain somebody for the evening, um, wonderful food and wine, all of that. Compare that to how you felt at the end when there were the strings attached. How much of a difference is there?
Well, because she's close. I don't think it made any difference at all, actually.
Oh,
Didn't
okay.
make any difference at all to how I felt about her. I didn't resent it. I love
Okay.
her dog very much. I didn't even think, I wish you told me sooner. I don't know whether it's because it's kind of like a habitual thing, and I was kind of like subconsciously half thinking that there was a catch. I
Yeah,
don't know. I don't think so. I don't think so.
it's
You know,
fascinating because
I love her very much, and I didn't feel put out or anything, or it didn't change my perspective of her at all.
okay.
No.
So I think that what's interesting about this is that generosity is very subjective, isn't it, from both sides? And so
Yeah.
I can imagine somebody, not you, in a similar situation, feeling really aggrieved that somebody in the morning said, oh, and can you look after the dog? It's like I can imagine somebody with a different character, maybe a different relationship with that person would be along these lines of, so they didn't really invite me for dinner last night. And the only reason that they cooked that nice meal and the only reason they bought that lovely bottle of wine was because they knew that they were going to put me in this impossible position of not being able to say no. And I've ended up looking after the dog. So that that could be a different perspective of exactly.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Do you know what is interesting personally for me? Because I've always had what's called a Cinderella complex.
Okay.
And I will, I I will do anything for anyone, and not want anything in return. I don't even want to go to a ball. Um, I will, so I am a little bit of a yes person, which these days isn't meant to be very good, but it doesn't upset me. I'm happy the way that I am. I can, and I know some people who would have been aggrieved with that. Certainly I do. I'm just trying to think whether it would have been the same if it had been a friend, not a relation. Just thinking about my neighbour and her cats. So she comes over. Yeah, do you know what? I think there is a slight difference. I think that if my neighbour had said, "Come over, we're going to cook you dinner," why don't you? Well, okay, not a neighbour, somebody who lived, a friend that lived drivable distance away. You can stay overnight, And then I said the same thing, I'll be going. And then they said, "Oh, well, we'd really like you to stay until 6. I think probably then I would have thought, what the chuck?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's kind of taking a liberty there, isn't it?
Yes,
Perhaps
yes, yes. So I
when,
don't think I'm that much of a yes person. Thinking about it like that, I probably would have thought, hang on a minute. Firstly, why didn't you ask me in the first place? Because you know that I'd have said yes. You
yeah.
don't have to kind of like trick me into it. So I think that I'm more of a yes person and a Cinderella complex person with family.
And what about that creative part of the question? So when you think of the word generosity, what images come to mind? What sounds come to mind? And what feelings come to mind?
When I think of the word generosity, this is really random, but I see a cartoon version of God with white blowy hair and kind of like chubbyish Father Christmassy type cheeks. And he's on a and he's resting on like his arms are resting on a cloud and he's blowing. Randomly, that's an image that I see of generosity.
Wow.
And I don't know where that's come from, but that's when I think of the word generous, and I think I always have, it's this kind of like blowing goodness into the world, maybe, or I don't know, but it's and I'm not a believer either in God. I'm you know, I'm not a religious person at all, but I just have this image of this lovely face, cartoony sort of face, and on a puffy cloud, and just these blowing images, diagrams.
Well, wouldn't that be a beautiful thing for a higher being to actually do that and blow a sense
Yeah,
of generosity into the world? Um,
yeah,
when
that's what
when
I
you
see.
when you started talking about like an older man, I'm just responding to your random thinking. So this is my random thinking in response. Was my granddad, and I stopped there because I remember him saying to me when I was probably about 5 or 6 years old, and this is before decimalization, of course. So he said, "Would you like a sixpence?" So I said, "Well, yes, of course." It was like a reasonable amount of money, I seem to remember. And so he said, "Okay, I'll give it to you tomorrow. Remind me." So I said, "Okay, thank you very much." So the next day I said to him, "Grandad, do you remember what you said yesterday? You were going to give me a sixpence." And he said, "Yes, I do. When did I say I was going to give it to you?" So I said, "Tomorrow." And he said, I will. And so that's not very generous at all, is it?
That's really mean.
Yeah.
That is really mean, actually.
And what about sound? What sound comes to mind when you think about generosity?
Wind chimes.
Okay.
Yeah, with chimes in the wind. A wind again. I don't know what it is with generosity and wind, but the tinkling of wind chimes. Hmm.
Okay, mine is something to do with water actually, rather than wind. So this is,
Ah, another element.
yeah, another element. So I'm thinking of like a gushing waterfall or something like that.
I can
Maybe
see that,
this
too.
notion of overflowing. So more than you need, I guess that's where the connection is. More than is needed, and an abundance of something. And then what about feeling? What about feeling when you think about generosity?
Oh, I don't know. That's a hard one because I've never really thought about this question. Feeling, I mean, it's a bit cliched, but warmth and
Yeah.
comfort and a feeling of being loved and looked after, cared for, that sort of thing. But I mean, these are just new from today because I've never really given it much thought.
Yeah,
But
they're similar for me as well. And like you say, when I was thinking about those feelings, I was thinking, oh, that's a bit cliched. Um, but there's another one that you haven't mentioned that's come through for me, which is kind of extreme contentment, actually.
mhm,
Whether you're giving or receiving, this feeling of either receiving something that is just great, that you weren't expecting, and when you're giving, to see the impact on the other person and their joy that is greater than they could have imagined. So those two things as well. So we've started off kind of quite philosophical. So now let's get a bit practical. And when have you experienced generosity? You mentioned your husband, but maybe there's other examples as well. And this can either be giving or receiving or witnessing.
mm, um, well, I am quite a generous person. I love to give. When has somebody been generous to me? Uh, I'm talking about my neighbour again. I mean, I've only been in Haddenham for 2 years, but my neighbour is very, very generous person. And she has an abundance of fruit and vegetables in her beautiful garden. And she knows that I love vegetables. And so she will often come round unexpected, but with baskets full of like, beetroots and spring onions and lettuce. And so she doesn't want a penny for them. Oh, strawberries, raspberries, and plums. And so that she, she's very generous in that way. And I think that generosity isn't just a tangible thing. Generosity can be somebody giving their time to listen to you or giving their time to do something for you. So I think that generosity can not just be something tangible, but something like time, listening.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. And I think maybe it's kind of easy to stay stuck in the finance slash value tangible space. But actually, like you've said, there's generosity of time, there's generosity of spirit, right? So
Yes,
those things
exactly.
are kind of bigger than the just the tangible stuff.
Yes.
Mm. Actually, an example has come to mind here, which is going to kind of challenge what we're talking about, actually. So this was relayed to me by a friend who was celebrating a family Christmas. and his brother brought everybody, so his siblings and his parents, he brought everybody an envelope, not a present, an envelope. And they took in turns to give their presents to each other. And when it came to his turn, he gave the envelopes out and he said something along the lines of, I had a really good year. And so here is a check for £8,000 for each of you. And the guy that was telling me the story said that it fell totally flat because there was a feeling that he was kind of doing it to make a point about how successful he was, rather than really for the people that were receiving the gift. So we come back to this subjectivity thing again, don't we? Because some people might be delighted to receive that, and other people apparently not.
I would have been delighted. I wouldn't have wanted to look for an ulterior motive. I mean, he could always spout off about how successful his business is. I mean, he doesn't have to spend what 8, 16, 24, 36, whatever thousand on however many envelopes he gave out. I mean, I would say that's very, very generous. And I would have appreciated where was my invite that Christmas? That's what I want to know. I'd have been there.
It does make the question though, because maybe he would have been able, if he could have been bothered to think of a gift that might well have cost a lot less than the check.
Something a bit more personal.
Yeah.
Rather than doling out money. Yeah. But I'm with him because I hate shopping for people. And ever since my children were old enough, I just gave the money. I said, there's some money. And sometimes that does sound a bit uncaring. I just don't, I don't get any enjoyment out of picking out presents. I don't get that kind of like excitement about it. So I'm with him. I would much prefer to give my kids, and I just give them some money and let them, sometimes I'll get them into, if I see something and I think, oh, Joe would love that, or oh, Mike's would love that, or they'd love that, then I'll get it and I'll save it for Christmas and I'll give it to them as a surprise. Or they'll say something in the year like, oh, I'd love that, and I think, oh, right, I'll remember that for Christmas. But so that's what I do. But for what I call the big present, no, I just can't be asked. That sounds horrible, doesn't it?
No, not at all. There's a parallel here.
It just sounds terrible, but I just don't have the inclination at all.
My daughter, a few weeks ago, when I went to see her, so she's grown up. She just said something like, "Oh, I wish we had a butter dish." So
oh,
really? They've got 3 young children. They've got a house that they did up a bit, so money's a bit short. So I didn't say anything. I just took it in, and then last time at the weekend when I saw her, not this weekend, the weekend before, I took a butter dish. And she was just totally thrilled, even though it's a silly little gift. But then like you mentioned, the big present. So if you think, I suppose you're talking about birthdays and Christmas, I've discovered a new strategy actually this year. So previously I would try and think of something that my children would enjoy. But this year I decided to take Jack. He is interested in wine. And so I invited him to come to Saint-Emilion in Bordeaux for the weekend, and we visited a few chateaux.
Nice.
And we had such a good time. It wasn't actually what we did as much as the time that we were together for.
Mm-hmm.
We don't really do that.
Mm.
And so now I've told the other children that that's what we're going to do going forward. So choose something that they really enjoy or are interested in, and then we will do something together over a weekend, either here or not too far away.
That is so interesting and so aligned with what I do now. For example, for last year I took my daughter to Malaysia for 10 days.
Wow.
The
Don't
year
let my
before
son
that,
know.
the year before that, I took my other daughter to Estepona in Malaga for a few days. The same daughter, we're booking a spa retreat for a couple of days in Aylesbury. So they're kind of like and it's all on me. It's kind of like, well, I think I'd like to do that. I haven't seen you for a while. Let's get together, that sort of thing. So there are sort of like mini presents throughout the year as well. And sometimes you just don't want to do something like that at Christmas, because if you get a voucher or something, it just kind of like sits there and doesn't, nothing works, nothing happens. So I tend to say, right, what are you doing on the 16th of August? Why don't we go and have a spa day? Oh yeah, brilliant. So that's what I tend to do. I'm not a Christmas fan.
Go on.
I just don't. I'm not a fan of Christmas and the present giving. I'd rather just give gifts throughout the year when it's meaningful and when it's of value and when it's so appreciated. I think Christmas is very overrated.
Yeah, I agree. So we, as a family, we have a ceiling budget, and
Mm-hmm.
it's presents per couple and it's not a very high ceiling. So that means that you're not allowed to spend very much money, and you've got to put some thought into what you're getting so that it creates a positive impact. Because actually, this is another point about generosity being relative, because like that story about the £8,000 check, that's hugely generous for somebody who doesn't have very much, but to a billionaire, it's not
Mm.
particularly generous, right?
No, no.
Okay. So what about the opposite side of the coin then? So where have you noticed a lack of generosity?
Oh, where haven't I? Um, some people have been very, very mean to me, not just in my business, but personally as well. So I would say that the opposite of generosity is probably being mean, stingy.
And
Um,
where have you experienced that or noticed that? A specific example?
oh, let's see. Um, Sometimes where I've just maybe for asked for help, and the person that I've asked, even though I asked them because it wouldn't have been too much trouble for them and not too much to go out of their way, they haven't wanted to do it. They haven't wanted to help. So and I feel that they could have done easily. Maybe they felt that it would have been hassle, too much going on in their lives at that moment. They didn't want to do the traveling maybe, or whatever. So I felt that that was a bit mean, but I can't say why or how they were feeling that way, because I didn't ask them. So I just felt a bit disgruntled. Maybe if I'd have said, well, why? They'd have said, well, I hate driving in the dark. I don't do motorways. I need to be back by 3 o'clock. to do this, that, and the other, but that it was just kind of like a flat no. And I think that had they given me, or had I asked, why not, maybe I wouldn't have felt so disgruntled.
Yeah, and actually, you've reminded me of a situation where I think people thought that I wasn't being very generous. So again, it was a family occasion. I was visiting with my stepfather, and that day we had to drive separately. So he had his car, I had my car, back to my home at the end of the day. He is in his 70s and his eyesight's not as great as it used to be. And I wanted us to complete most of the journey while it was still daylight rather than driving in the dark. And the weather wasn't great either. And so this must have been, maybe it was a Christmas time thing actually, or maybe it was winter anyway. So dark from 4 o'clock, something like that. So it was a lunch occasion, and I told everybody that I was leaving at 3 o'clock. And I just sensed people were like, why are you leaving so early? And I didn't want to show him up, I didn't want to make a big thing of it. And so I just said, I don't like driving in the dark. I don't feel so safe. And that's why I want to complete the journey, da, 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 da. So I'm just telling that story because it supports what you were saying about how you couldn't put yourself in their shoes. There might have been reasons why they responded in that way that you thought wasn't particularly generous, but who knows? Who knows why?
Yes, this is it. If you don't ask. And I think it's always a thing, it's just reminded me of something that can almost blow your own trumpet a bit by saying to yourself, I wouldn't have done that. Or, you know, I wouldn't have been so mean, I'd have done it. Well, if she'd have asked me, I'd have done it. And there's always that kind of like a little bit, I'm better than you because I'd have done that for you. And you didn't do that for me. So, I'm almost the better person. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely,
Kind of like,
makes sense. And I'm just thinking, not only the thought, but I've heard conversations where you have a group of people who have a 2-hour conversation along the lines that you've just outlined. And it's like, I would have done this. Would you have done that? And, they have the big, long conversation. And from my perspective, it's like, what is the point? What a waste of breath, because you'll never know. So what really?
Yeah, exactly. What a waste of time.
Yeah. Now, Wendy, on ValuesJam, there's an opportunity for you to ask your own question. So I'd like to invite you to ask your own question about generosity, beginning with who, what, where, when, why, or how. And then either you can answer straight away if you've got the answer, or else I can go first if you would like. And let's see what we come up with. So have you got a question there?
Why do you think generosity is such a redeeming feature?
Ooh. Well, I suppose are you asking me to go first, or do you know the answer?
Yes, you're going first while I struggle to think of something.
Okay. Well, I'm thinking that by definition, if you're on the receiving end of something that you think is more than the other person needs to give, then they've chosen to do that and are giving more. So that's got to be a redeeming feature in your eyes of them. That's what comes to mind first.
Right, yes. That was an easy one. I should have given you something far more difficult. Give me an easy one.
So actually, but it wouldn't be a redeeming feature if, so imagine a homeless person on the street and a clearly well-dressed, wealthy person walking past and maybe giving them some loose change when they might easily be able to give them a note.
Yeah.
So
Or
what
pop
is,
into Greg's and get them a sausage roll and a hot drink.
yeah. So then that adds a bit of empathy and human caring rather than just the act of giving
Yes.
money.
Yes, this is what I was
Um,
talking about earlier. It's not just the giving of something material, it's the thinking behind it and the
yeah.
caring behind it.
Having
Yeah.
said that, I heard a story from a colleague of mine. We had been talking about gratitude in a UK Values Alliance meeting. And the lady, Lindsay, said that on her way home, she passed somebody in the street who was begging. And because gratitude was on her mind, she just thought she'd give this guy, and she had some pound coins, which she put into the guy's hat. And the guy said, "Can't you afford a fiver, love?" And
I'm
she said
taking it back out of his hat.
yeah, her initial reaction was like, oh, that, why do people have to behave like that? But when we talked about it afterwards, we were saying, who knows what impact you would have had. But that guy might have said that, but then might have detected that you didn't take it very well. And maybe he won't be like that with other people. Who knows?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
okay. Now, the way that we bring a values jam to a close is always the same, and it is this final question. So, what are you encouraged to do differently about generosity as a result of our conversation today?
Oh, just run that by me one more time, Alan.
Okay. What are you encouraged to do differently about generosity as a result of what we've talked about today?
Probably to consider the feelings of the other person, either the giver or the receiver. Think about what that act might mean to them in a couple of ways, not just a positive way, but maybe thinking if it can be construed in a negative way as well, and just really thinking about the opposite person, the giver or the taker, either before I accept the generosity or before I give the generosity. I think that's what this conversation has made me today, has made me think that it's not always one-sided. There are the thoughts, feelings, and opinions of the other person, and they should be taken into consideration.
Okay. And I use a phrase to think like others for others. So this is from my days in hospitality. And I used to encourage all of our frontline service team to do just that. So, to try to understand what it is that the other person needs, and then to anticipate those needs and to offer them something like almost before they knew they wanted it or needed it. And I think that that's what I've taken away from today, because
Mm,
rather than just, oh, I've got £5 in my pocket, so you can have it,
mm,
far more meaningful to go and get them something to eat or
mm.
or something like that. As long as you're prepared for the the occasional person who might say, "You could have bought me a beer, mate."
Well, yes, I mean, I have nipped into Greg's on occasion and bought a sausage roll and a cup of coffee for a homeless person. And it has been said, I don't take sugar.
Yeah,
What can you do?
exactly. Okay, so Wendy, you're now a qualified values jammer. Thank you so much for your generosity joining me today, and I'll look forward to seeing you again.
It's been great. Thank you so much, Alan.
Cheers, bye.